Nathan, please just listen to me. It was nothing. It meant nothing. Please don't do this.
There is a particular kind of fool the world does not warn you about. Not the fool who is careless, not the fool who is reckless, but the fool who loves too completely. This is the story of Nathan Cole, a man who built everything with his hands, his mind, and his discipline. A man who loved once, completely and without reservation. And a man who discovered slowly and painfully that the woman he loved had never once loved him back. She had only loved what he could provide. Nathan Cole was 36 years old when he met Serena Voss. At that point in his life, he had already built more than most men twice his age. He ran a mid-sized real estate development firm he had started at 29 with 2 partners and a vision that most banks laughed at in the beginning. By 33, they had stopped laughing. By 35, Nathan's firm had completed 11 commercial projects across 3 cities, employed 47 people, and carried a reputation for delivering exactly what they promised, on time, under budget, and built to last. He was disciplined in the way that only people who came from very little can be. He did not spend carelessly. He did not trust easily. He did not let people close without reason. He was, by every measure, a man who had learned to see clearly, which is why what happened next is both the most understandable and the most devastating thing about his story. He stopped seeing clearly the moment he saw Serena. She walked into a business networking event on a Thursday evening in March, and Nathan noticed her the way you notice something that does not quite belong. Not because she was out of place, but because she was too perfectly placed, too composed, too deliberate in the way she moved through a room full of people who were all trying too hard. She was not trying at all. And that was the most effective thing about her. They spoke for 40 minutes that evening. She was warm without being forward, intelligent without being performative. She asked him questions about his work that showed she had actually listened to his answers. By the time he drove home that night, Nathan Cole, a man who had not been moved by anyone in years, was already thinking about when he would see her again. He called her 2 days later. She answered on the second ring. That should have been his first sign. But love has a way of turning every red flag into something that looks almost like a green one. They dated for 3 months before Nathan introduced her to his closest friends. 4 months before he took her to meet his mother. 6 months before she moved into his apartment in the city, a spacious 2-bedroom he had owned outright since he was 32. From the outside, they looked like the kind of couple people pointed at. Successful man, beautiful, composed woman, a life that appeared to have been assembled with care. Nathan was generous with her from the beginning, not recklessly. He was never reckless, but deliberately. He paid for everything they did together because he wanted to. He upgraded her phone when hers broke. He covered her car insurance when she mentioned it had lapsed. He gave her a monthly allowance for personal expenses because she was between jobs, and he told himself it was temporary. 6 months became 12. The temporary became permanent. And Nathan told himself that was fine, because she was there and she was warm and she made his apartment feel like a home for the first time since he had owned it. He was happy, or something close enough to happy that he did not examine it too carefully. It started with a notification he was never supposed to see. Serena had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered one Sunday morning. Nathan was not the kind of man who checked other people's phones. He had never once looked through hers in 14 months of being together. But the phone lit up face up, and the name on the notification was not one he recognized. Not a woman's name, not a colleague, not a family member she had mentioned. A man's name. And the preview of the message beneath it contained 3 words that rearranged something in Nathan's chest. He did not pick up the phone. He did not read further. He simply stood in his kitchen and looked at those 3 words until Serena came back into the room. And then he smiled at her and said nothing. That was the moment Nathan Cole stopped being a man in love and became a man paying attention. He said nothing for 2 weeks. He watched instead. He noticed that she left the apartment 3 times a week in the late afternoon, always with a reason that made perfect sense individually, but felt inconsistent as a pattern. A friend, an errand, a class she had enrolled in. He had never met the friend. He had never seen evidence of the class. The errands never produced anything she brought home. He noticed that her phone was never left unattended anymore. Not since the Sunday morning notification. It went everywhere she went. Into the bathroom, face down on the table during dinner, under her pillow at night. He noticed that the money he transferred to her account every month disappeared faster than it had in the beginning. He was not monitoring her spending. He had never done that. But when he casually offered to pay for something she should have had funds for and she hesitated before saying she had already sorted it, something did not add up. Nathan was a man who had built a company by seeing what others missed. He had spent 7 years reading numbers, reading people, reading rooms. He knew the difference between coincidence and pattern. This was a pattern. He hired someone to follow her on a Wednesday afternoon in October. He did not enjoy doing it. He sat in his office that afternoon and tried to concentrate on a project proposal while a man he had paid $300 followed the woman he loved through the city. It was the longest afternoon of his professional life. The report came back the following morning with photographs. Serena had taken a taxi to an apartment building 40 minutes from the one she shared with Nathan. She had been buzzed in without calling ahead, which meant she had a regular arrangement, not a one-time visit. She had stayed for 2 hours and 40 minutes. When she came out, she was straightening her jacket, and her expression was the relaxed, unhurried expression of someone who had just been exactly where they wanted to be. The investigator had also pulled the name on the apartment lease from public records. A man named Darius Webb, 28 years old, no listed employment, an apartment in a building whose monthly rent was significantly higher than anything a man with no listed income should have been able to afford. Nathan looked at the photographs for a long time. Then he opened his bank records and looked at 14 months of transfers to Serena's account. Then he understood completely. He had not been her boyfriend. He had been her income, and Darius Webb had been the reason she needed one. Nathan did not confront her that evening, or the next. He needed 3 days, not to grieve, though the grief was there, cold and heavy in his chest, but to think clearly, to make sure that when he moved correctly and completely, with no room for manipulation, no space for her to reframe the situation or appeal to his emotions. He spoke to his lawyer first, because Serena had been living in his apartment for 8 months, and in some jurisdictions, that created legal considerations he needed to understand before he acted. He removed her name from the shared account he had set up for household expenses. Quietly, without announcement. He canceled the standing transfer to her personal account, the monthly allowance that had been funding not just her life, but another man's rent. Then on a Friday evening, when she came home from one of her afternoon absences, he was sitting at the kitchen table. The photographs were in a folder in front of him. He did not open it. He simply said, "I need you to be out of this apartment by Sunday. I have already spoken to a lawyer. I am not angry. I am not going to argue with you, but I need you to understand that I know everything, and I need you to be gone." Serena looked at the folder on the table. Then she looked at Nathan's face, and whatever she saw there told her that the version of him she had been managing for 14 months no longer existed. She left Sunday morning. She took what was hers, which, when it came down to it, was not very much at all. The months after Serena left were not easy. Nathan would be the first to tell you that. It was not the money he grieved, though the money had been significant. It was the version of himself he had been while he was with her. The man who had stopped seeing clearly. The man who had confused warmth with love, and presence with loyalty, and comfort with something real. He had been smarter than that his entire life. And for 14 months he had chosen not to be. That was the thing that sat with him longest. Not what she had done, but what he had allowed without looking. He threw himself back into his work with a focus that surprised even his partners. Within 6 months of Serena leaving, Nathan's firm had closed the largest deal in its history. A commercial development contract that tripled their previous record. He had been too distracted to pursue it properly while she was in his life. Now there were no distractions. He restructured the firm, brought in 2 new partners with skills that complemented his, expanded into a 4th city, started the process of acquiring a property portfolio that his accountant told him would make the development income look modest within 5 years. He did not date for a year, not out of bitterness. Nathan Cole was not a bitter man, but out of respect for what clarity had cost him and what it was worth to maintain it. He heard about Serena once, through a mutual acquaintance, about 8 months after she left. Darius Webb had ended things with her 3 months after Nathan cut off the money. Without the funding she had been channeling to him, the relationship had lasted exactly as long as the income did. Nathan received that information, nodded once, and went back to what he was working on. He did not feel satisfaction. He did not feel vindication. He felt nothing about it at all. And that absence of feeling told him everything he needed to know about how completely he had healed. People talk about love like it is something that happens to you, like it arrives without warning and leaves the same way. And all you can do is survive the distance between the two. But Nathan Cole will tell you something different. He will tell you that love is not the most important thing a person can offer another. Clarity is the willingness to see clearly, even when seeing clearly costs you something you would rather keep. He gave Serena 14 months of his life, a significant portion of his income, and the rarest thing he had ever offered anyone, his complete and unguarded trust. She returned none of it. She had been somewhere else entirely the whole time, with someone else, funded by the man who thought she was his. But here is what she could not take when she left. She could not take what he had built before her. She could not take what he built after. She could not take his discipline, his vision, or the 14 lessons that 14 months of loving the wrong person had permanently installed in the man he became. Nathan Cole lost a woman who was never really his, And in losing her, he found back the version of himself that had built everything worth keeping in the first place. If this story moved you, you already know where to find the next one. Turning Point Tales, new stories every week.